What's up, everyone? DJ Short here with Eric Samulski. We're back for our usual Tuesday fantasy baseball Q&A right here on the NBC Sports YouTube page. Thanks for joining us. We'll be here for the next 30 minutes or so. We have the rare Tuesday afternoon baseball game. You don't see that ever, really, very much at all.
Yeah, and it's not even the game that's a rain delay makeup because that one's at 4:00.
Yeah, it's weird. So at least the Mets will get their loss out of the way early today. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
The Edwin Diaz outing yesterday was not great.
Yeah, I have some slight concern with Diaz right now. The velocity is down quite a bit on his fastball. The contact rate is, I tweeted this out earlier today, the highest it's been at any point in his career. His second, his back-to-back days, he's fine, with that extra rest. But if he's trying to go back-to-back, he's been getting hit pretty hard. I don't know what to attribute this to. Is he still building up? I'm not sure, but we're seeing a different Edwin Diaz than we saw 2 years ago, which was a historic season. So maybe that's
right
to be expected. But do you have any concern about Diaz?
No, I don't have concern. I think that maybe the idea that he's the top fantasy baseball closer is certainly no longer as much of a sure thing as we anticipated before. I think that he can be a lesser version of himself and still be a really good fantasy closer. I would need to admittedly dig in more on a pitch level to see what the major issues are. But I don't think even after that terrible outing, it's a 3.2 ERA or something. It's nothing there where you're there's a major issue here. It's that, okay, maybe he's not, he's not the guy anymore, but he's still a pretty good guy.
Yeah, he's already given up more home runs than he gave up in 2022 as well. But I do find it interesting, when Diaz gives up home runs, he's usually smirking a little bit, almost admiring the home run, yeah, he got me. So he does have a good, he has good demeanor. He never lets it get to him, which I think I like to see, especially after that first season in New York, which is a total disaster.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, like I said, we'll be here for the next 30 minutes or so. Feel free to get your questions into the queue. We'll try to get to everyone before we head out here. Let's get our first question. Rhino's back with a couple of questions in our queue. And another pitcher who's kind of been up and down, I guess is the best way to say. What's up with Tanner Bybee? Sometimes night and day with each start. It's been hard to trust him in any matchup lately because you don't know what you're going to get with him. I looked at his Statcast page this morning because I do have him in one league, and I was kind of wondering what's going on there. His four-seam fastball, it's kind of crazy. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I know opposing hitters are batting over 400 against his four-seam so far this season. I don't think there's a real velocity difference. I don't know if you've had a chance to dig into it yet, but certainly as far as expected numbers, it's not like he has bad luck. He's earning what's happened so far.
Yeah. Well, it's a bad fastball. The issue is that it was a bad fastball last year as well. And that's kind of the Guardians' MO in the past, right? How many guys have they had who have poor fastballs, but, good combination of breaking balls, and they're able to, make it work. And so, Bybee, I think, got really lucky last year with some of the off-speed stuff. I wrote about him in the preseason, and I had him in between 35 and 40 something in my starting pitcher rankings. And I was just he's throwing his breaking balls up in the zone a lot, and they're not getting hit really hard, but you don't really want to throw your breaking balls up in the zone so much. And that has come back to bite him a little bit this year. He's throwing the breaking balls up in the zone, and they're getting hit harder this year than they were last year. He has a real issue against left-handed hitting, sorry. And a lot of that is connected to the fastball. The fastball is performing worse against lefties. And again, because it's not a great fastball and he's not locating it really well, and doesn't get it up a lot, like lefties are kind of teeing off on that pitch. The slider has been good to lefties. Weirdly, like his changeup is performing better to righties, which you would think doesn't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the lefties are, he doesn't really throw his curve to righties, but his curve has been terrible this year, and lefties are absolutely clobbering it for a 25% barrel rate. So there are some issues. I am not ready to say like we're dropping Bybee. I mean, this is a guy who I think can make it work with 2 solid secondary pitches and a mediocre fastball, but it has to come down to locations, and they're not there right now.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's not a drop to be clear, but I think there's real reasons behind the numbers that we're seeing right now. We'll just have to see how he can adjust to the fastball. And I mean, I trust the Guardians in terms of pitching.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what they can do there. Jada with a question: buy or sell Joe Adell and Garrett Crochet? Maybe the good question here, or the best question here: who do you believe in more based off of what we've seen so far this season?
Garrett Crochet.
I mean, I would agree with you on that. Yeah.
I don't think Crochet has had like one like bad outing, right? He's been fairly solid. I do think that like he's flashed a better changeup than I thought. He's got the fastball, he's got the cutter, he's got a slide. Like he's got a lot of more pitches than I think we anticipated. He's gonna miss a lot of bats. I think there will be some inconsistency. Sure, I think we expected that from somebody who was didn't make really any starts, was battling injury, had been a reliever too. Like there's a lot of adjustments he's making. The issue for me, I just think that he'll have some down starts against some good offenses, and his team is not going to get him a lot of wins. But I think he's a good pitcher, a solid streamer against 75% of offenses. And the thing for me with Adell is like Adell has been basically league average this year in terms of his contact ability, even when he was running really hot. And so I think like we're starting to see the batting average kind of dip down a little bit, and the power is staying up. But I don't necessarily think that he is a markedly different hitter. I think he's making slightly better decisions, in particular better decisions like out of the zone, but he still is going to be a little bit below average in terms of those types of decisions. And so I think like the batting average is going to go down. The power is there. He also has stopped running as much because he was getting caught stealing all the time. And so he has like, I think it's just 2 steals total in the past like 14 games, 2 weeks. Sorry. And so like, I think if the stolen base numbers go down a little bit, you're going to get good power and a fine, maybe 240-ish batting average in a bad lineup. And so I'm buying what he already did. I'm selling him continuing to do it at that level.
Yeah, the contact rate is up across the board, which is great to see for a player that struck out like 40% of the time when he was with the Angels last year. So nowhere to go but up there,
right?
For sure.
But that contact rate is up to like a league average rate. So that's where it's like that's you're not thumbing your nose at that, but you're not like, oh my God, we're finally getting, top prospect in all of baseball, Joe Adell. Like I just don't know that player is in there anymore in the way that we thought he was.
What I think is beneficial to his situation in a weird way, the Angels are god awful. They're a bad team. That actually helps him a bit. And where in the past there was like we saw what the Angels did last year. They went all in because they knew Ohtani was probably going to leave. So it was almost like they were striving for contention even when it was unrealistic. But now that we know they're bad, he's going to get every opportunity to play because the options there are not great. So I think this is like the kind of the prove it year for Adele, and we'll see what he can do. And maybe going out there every day, he can finally, find his way as a regular in Major League Baseball. So
Yeah.
we will see about that. I'm hopeful. Dad is back. Welcome back. What is the long-term outlook of Jason Dominguez? Yankees appear to be pretty settled in the outfield. Funny thing about the year. So while it appears that they are settled in the outfield and/or DH spot, I wouldn't count on that to continue. Dominguez, as we know, coming back from he had Tommy John, right? Like he had UCL surgery. I think it was Tommy John. Starting the rehab assignment, we know the Yankees will let him take his time. He's not going to be up anytime soon. But I do think we'll see him at some point this year. And while the Yankees appear settled for now, like there will be an injury. He will find his way to the Yankees lineup at some point. When that will be, I don't know. So I wouldn't necessarily stash him. But I think he'll play, a reasonable amount with the Yankees before the end of the season.
Yeah, I think people were the original expectation was like July or August in terms of when he was coming back. And also, are they settled? I mean, if Dominguez is ready and looks good, are you gonna say, man, we've got Alex Verdugo on that 1-year contract, so sorry, Jason, we can't play you. And I know they liked Verdugo because Verdugo is a high contact rate hitter, and that's what their lineup needed. That's not what Dominguez is. So I understand. I'm not saying they would just cut Verdugo when Dominguez is ready. I'm saying if there are avenues to get him at bats, if they're like, hey, this guy looks really good, he's ready to go, we want him in this lineup, they could get him in the lineup. And maybe that doesn't mean cutting Verdugo. Maybe it means Verdugo becomes a fourth outfielder, and Stanton is like the everyday DH anyway, and you put Dominguez in the outfield and Trent Grisham goes away. There are possibilities here for this year if the Yankees really want to get Dominguez at bats. And then obviously future, we don't know what's going to happen with Juan Soto. We know that they want him to stay in New York, but that's not a given. And Verdugo's on a 1-year deal. So Verdugo, could be gone, is likely going to be gone after this year. Unfortunately for Yankee fans, Stanton isn't going anywhere. He's got, I think, 4 more years on his deal, and he's making over $30 million a year. So, I'm looking right now, the first club option isn't until 2028. When they can finally get out of that deal.
But he has the fastest bat in the majors.
Right. Just call another major league team and say, hey, do you want Stanton? He has the best bat speed in baseball.
I haven't gotten a chance. We were talking before the Q&A about the new stats that Statcast has come out with. Very interesting stuff. I haven't had a chance to really go in with a fine-tooth comb like I like to do with some of these newer metrics. But you wrote an article for the site yesterday. We're going to have a few more over the course of the week. As you've started to dig into it a little bit, what has surprised you the most? And you as a fantasy manager, because some of the Statcast metrics, they're not going to necessarily tell you who to drop and pick up from a fantasy perspective. But is there anything in there where you're like, man, that helps my process in terms of waiver pickups or what have you?
Right. Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before. It's it is part of a puzzle, right? So it's not going to tell you anything alone. I'm not going to pick up anybody and say, or look at a leaderboard and be like, oh my God, this guy swings so hard, I have to pick him up. And so I think combining factors, like the article I posted on the website yesterday looked at, okay, who has really good bat speed, but also has a really short swing. Right. The idea being somebody who could swing really fast, which will generate exit velocities, but somebody who can be short to the ball, which tends to increase contact. And so there are some guys on that list that now jumped out to me where I'm like, oh, okay. Jesus Sanchez is on there. Wilyer Abreu is on there. Colton Cowser is on there. Guys where it's like, okay, some people are jumping off the Colton Cowser, ride right now because the results aren't there. But I keep saying, like, he's not hitting well average wise right now, but he has like a 16% barrel rate while he's hitting 143 over the last 3 weeks. Like, he's hitting a lot of balls hard. His walk rate is near 15% over that time. So I'm still looking at like the quality of the contact, and I'm seeing a hitter that is still making good quality contact, even though the results aren't there. So I found that to be interesting. And then another thing we were also talking about beforehand is like, I do like seeing, I could see the swing speed and the swing length within quadrants of the plate. So like I was mentioning, I've been kind of souring on Spencer Torkelson a little bit in like shallower formats. I think you could still hold Torkelson in deeper formats, but like you look at his run value and it's like, okay, up and away, he's really struggling. And also he's got a really weird cold spot, like middle in. And you're like, okay, why is his cold spot middle in? And then you go look at his swing length and you look at his swing speed and you realize that his swing gets markedly longer middle in. And now as you get lower in the strike zone, your swing gets longer. That's a natural bat path. But comparing Torkelson to other similar hitters, his swing gets a little longer, a little faster in like the middle of the zone. So he's getting beat inside, and you're starting to see him get pitched inside more. So now you can equate those two things, and you're like, oh, this is why this guy is struggling, because his swing is a little too long inside. Pitchers are noticing, and they're pitching him inside more, and his pop-up rate is up a lot this year. And so now I'm able to like put those pieces together and say, okay, that's not something he can't fix, but that is an issue right now that he needs to fix based on how pitchers are pitching him.
How, like, I know there's like internal metrics that teams have access to that we don't see. I'm assuming they know that as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure they do. Yeah. I mean, like Eno Saris posted that article over at The Athletic that I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I read the section of it where Matt Chapman just is like, yeah, we've had this data for years.
Right.
And so, the idea, like, players know this stuff because teams know this stuff, and we're now getting it publicly. And so like players probably know, oh, what is my bat speed year over year? Or what is my swing length year over year? We don't know that because that hasn't been made public, but that will be another thing that will be interesting. And hopefully we'll also get that month over month, right? And we'll start to see, like, are there any deteriorations and injuries? And you could see something where like, okay, guys who might be hurt right now, your Corbin Carrolls, your Paul Goldschmidts, whatever it is, guys that are struggling, you could start to look at like, is there any meaningful change in their bat speed or their swing length month over month? What might be contributing to why that swing has gotten so long, so those are some interesting things that I think we will eventually be able to use with this information.
For sure. So a little injury news right now. Bryce Harper was scratched from today's lineup against the Mets with a migraine. I don't know if you saw this. He was hit in the head by a throw from Tomas Nido last night. I wonder if it's something to do with that. It was one of those things where he was throwing the ball back to the pitcher, and it just happened to be the right spot, bonk, like right in the helmet, fortunately. But I do wonder if it maybe is something like that. It was not a hard throw back to the pitcher, but either way, totally unexpected on Bryce Harper.
Right. And some of those things, like, the baseball being as hard as it is, like, it just has to hit you in the right spot. It reminds me a little bit of something not at all baseball related, but I don't know if you saw the Novak Djokovic thing earlier this week, where he was signing autographs after a match at this clay court tournament in Italy, as the tune up to the French Open. And a fan was leaning over to try to get Djokovic's autograph, and the fan's water bottle fell out of his backpack and just hit Djokovic directly on top of the head. And then he was like apparently feeling lightheadedness and dizziness afterwards, and then got obliterated in his match the next day.
Oh my goodness.
And it's one of those things where like, you're just, a hit on the head like that doesn't need to knock you unconscious. Like, it just has to hit you in the right spot, and it can be unsettling for a little while.
Oh, I've been there. If you have siblings, and you played backyard football or anything, you understand. Any concerns with Evan Carter's platoon splits and lingering back issues, lack of stolen bases? against the lefties this year, Evan Carter has been basically worthless. And yeah, he does have the back issues. I think he got an injection for that. Not something that might send him to the injured list, but I am a bit worried about Evan Carter right now. What do you think?
Well, I'm concerned about the platoon issues because the Rangers don't play him against lefties. So like I'm concerned in the sense that, like, he's not on the field. And
Yeah.
so that's a problem for me. Um I'm concerned about his I think he's overly passive. Um his in zone swing decision, like, value, is like sub 10th percentile in baseball. His swing aggression is like sub 5th percentile in baseball. um he before the back injury sidelined him, he was starting to get a little bit better. He was starting to make a little bit more, be a little bit more aggressive in the zone. um I still think he makes good decisions outside of the zone. Like, he's not chasing tons of pitches. And we know that he can make contact, and we know that he has power. So I keep looking at this and going, okay, nothing on here is alarming in the sense of, like, you know, he can't do this. It's just like, why are we taking so many called strikes? Why are we so passive in the strike zone? If we could change the approach a little bit, then maybe we're getting back to what we saw from him before. So, like, I, I'm a little concerned with his current approach, but I think it's more the approach than something within his swing being broken. The platoon splits are another issue because that was something that was a potential concern coming up, and the Rangers don't seem interested in trying to let him hit through it. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that signals to me that they have some concern.
Right. And so, I mean, it's one of those situations where you could like take player X and compare him to Evan Carter, and there's also a platoon outfielder, and then you're like, why did I draft Evan Carter as a top 100 player? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Um,
like, I'd have to look now, but I would assume that you're not getting much worse production from, like, Jake Fraley than you are from Evan Carter, and they're both guys who only play against right-handed pitching.
right.
And
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
that is obviously a little bit of a concern, but, like,
He's young. He's
young
rookie.
guy, you're hoping, the back in if the back injury clears up, you are hoping that you're able to, see that kind of trend in production tick up a little bit.
Uh, More young player conversation here. Patiently waiting for Junior Caminaro and Kobe Mayo. Any inside news on who gets the call first and when? I would keep
Definitely no inside news, but that's
no,
for
no,
sure.
we don't have. I don't have any great sources. Just have the voice inside my head, which I don't want you to hear that. But Caminaro, I would keep stashed in pretty much every league because I think his time could be any day.
Mhm.
But we've seen this already, and Ken Rosenthal had a pretty good piece about it recently too. Uh, these prospects that are getting called up, hitters, they are not enjoying the
Yeah.
immediate success that we have seen in previous years. That's not to say that Mayo and Caminero can't come up and make an impact, but it's far from a guarantee. So it's like, do you want to waste a bench spot? Not waste is a harsh word, but like, do you want to use a bench spot on a guy who may not be up for a month, or would you rather, you know, pick up someone who's producing right now and we have the data and they're hitting major league pitching?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think, like, there's a correlation between the fact that we've seen Major League Baseball shrink the minor league player pool, and the clear gap in production at the top level. And that is also just because, while I know they're shrinking a lot of lower level teams, the fewer players you allow into professional baseball at a younger age, the fewer opportunities you're giving for players to develop into quality, players. And the problem is, a lot of the guys um, who are getting kind of like squeezed out are the guys who probably profile as quad A players because they don't have
Yeah.
the upside of a top prospect, but they're solid enough. And so there's a big gap in AAA pitching and professional pitching. The answer to this question is, I think it's Junior Caminero. I just see the more immediate roster spot in saying, okay, he's the DH. Like Harold Ramirez just doesn't need to be a DH. He's already been up, right? The Rays had him up last year. So he could come up again. I believe in his ability to produce, as much as I believe in any prospect's ability to produce right away. But no inside news here. I mean, I would have thought they called up Mayo when they sent down Jackson Holiday, and they're rolling with Jorge Mateo at second base, and It is what it is.
Heston Kjerstad was sent down, and I remember how excited we were about Heston Kjerstad being called up. I think he got 2 at bats. Right. All right. Up next, a Red Sox question. Wilyer Abreu has more pop and has more stolen bases than Jiren Duran over the past few weeks. Duran's speed is elite. Of the two, who do you like more as the season progresses? You talked a lot about Abreu before the season, and I wasn't really necessarily focused or keen on Abreu, but I do think he's a pretty useful fantasy option, and that's borne out so far this season.
Yeah, I think this depends on your needs, right? Duran is going to give you more stolen bases, and Duran is going to play more often because the way they're constructed right now, they need him to play versus both righties and lefties. And so, Abreu is going to give you more power. I kind of think they both wind up settling around similar batting averages. So I do think they're not incredibly far off, but I like Abreu if I'm looking for runs and steals, and I like Duran if I'm looking for runs and steals, and I like Abreu if I'm looking for home runs, and probably RBIs because Duran's been hitting at the top of the lineup. And I probably don't want to be cutting either one. I'd look to trade if I need to get rid of one. But that's how I see it. I think they're both useful in all league types. I think Abreu gets a boost if you're in like a daily moves league, because you can say, oh, he's sitting against this lefty today, I'll put him on my bench. It's a little harder in weekly leagues because, if he has 4 games at the beginning of the week and it's 2 righties, 2 lefties, and you're like, he's going to sit 2 of these games, I don't know what to do.
Another question, Alec Manilla. Is he back? Are we buying the positive start against the Twins, or should we stay away? I guess that was an easy one. All right, up next. Yeah. What did you think? I mean, I know the first start back was not very good. He kind of had mixed results in the minors as well. Gave up 3 unearned runs in his start against the Twins, who have been rolling offensively. Would you pick up Robert Gasser or Alec Manilla?
Gasser without hesitation. I know that his line looked good against the Twins. If you go and just look at his strike zone plot, the command was terrible. And you could tell the command wasn't good because if you just look at his zone rate, he threw 46% of his pitches in the strike zone in this particular game. He got a decent amount of whiffs. That's great. He primarily got whiffs on his 4-seamer, which is typically not a pitch that he's getting whiffs on. And then if you start looking at where did he get whiffs on his 4-seamer, there's a lot of pitches that are not in the strike zone. And so he was getting chases on the particular day, but that has never been a skill that he's possessed. So I'm not all of a sudden going to believe that Alec Manoah's, fastball is going to start getting tons of whiffs outside of the zone. He didn't show me command of, a great number of his pitches. And so I look good for him. I'm not buying in. I'm picking up Gasser before him. I picked up Matt Manning over him, hoping that Matt Manning could sneak more of a long shot in that rotation. I'm trying to think of other guys that were available this week, but I'm picking up a lot of other guys over him. Clark Schmidt's still available in too many leagues. I'm picking up Dean Kramer over Alec Manoah. I like what Dean Kramer's been doing. So yeah, I'm not into it.
What about Javier Assad? The ERA is very low, but the advanced metrics don't really seem to be backing it up. Where do you sit on Assad?
I like Javier Assad as a pitcher. I think that he's a solid pitcher, a solid streamer. So he's a solid pitcher without overwhelming stuff who's going to go through streaks where he's pitching really well. And I think that's currently what we're getting right now. He is not allowing like any hard contact, right? But his pitches individually don't grade out well, but he also has a sub 8% swinging strike rate. So he's not getting swings and misses. So you are relying on a guy who has, a fairly deep 6-pitch arsenal, who is not getting swings and misses and is inducing weak contact and pitching above his stuff, right? That is the Chris Bassett blueprint. So the ceiling of what Javier Assad is doing is Chris Bassett, but we also have to understand that Chris Bassett doing what he did has always been one of those, everybody's waiting for that to fall apart because nothing suggests Bassett could keep doing what he's doing. And so Bassett is kind of like the outlier. So you're hoping that Javier Assad turns into a Chris Bassett type player, but in reality, it's probably more like, a guy who will go 4 or 5 starts, look really good. 2 starts are not good. 3, 4 starts look really good. 2 starts are not good. And you're also you're never going to get a lot of strikeouts, which will always keep the fantasy upside, middling. But he's certainly in deeper leagues. You should be using him because he's pitching well right
now. Adam is up next. He's saying he's been injury plagued. Royce Lewis, Tristan Casas, Spencer Strider, presumably Sean Murphy. Been maintaining good ratios. What point in a season can a manager or owner fall too behind in counting categories? You can fall too behind. It's also
not now though.
No, it's May 14th.
Yeah.
We're 6 weeks into the season, really. It is a 6-month grind. So I would say as long as you're competitive and you're waiting for some of these guys to come back, granted, Spencer Strider will not be one of them, but I think you can, especially if you're maintaining the good ratios, you can find a way to get to where you want to be. So I wouldn't be too discouraged, especially if you've been maintaining those good ratios and staying near the top of the pack as far as that's concerned. So no, I know it's been tough. I'm sure it's not the roster maybe you imagine. But yeah, I wouldn't get too discouraged yet.
Yeah, and I would also say, like, even in ratio categories, there's still time. And because ratio categories have the added benefit of like your league mates can get worse in those, right? Your league mates aren't losing home runs, but their ERAs could get worse, their whips could get worse, and there's a lot of time for that to still happen. So I don't believe it's too late to catch up in anything right now. I think like as you start to I have no science to back this up. I'll just tell you, for me, it's like July 1st, I start to think, I don't know if I can do it in some of these categories. And then I may, if I'm in a trades league, I might start to look at like, okay, I got to get rid of this guy. Or even like in weird things, like even in like an NFBC format, I might cut a category. Like if I am dead last in steals and my upside is I could gain 1 point, like I don't need to hold a Jose Caballero who is getting me, cut him and pick up somebody else.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I've always, and this has kind of been the industry standard for a long time. It's like Memorial Day weekend, you start to look at the standings.
Yes.
Both from like fantasy, but also like real baseball. Like sometimes I'll have people in my family like ask like, oh, maybe they're not like paying attention to baseball yet. And they're like, oh, what place are the Mets in? I'm like, I don't know. Like I don't really start paying attention yet because it's really not worth it to me yet to be like following the horse race in May. That's just me.
Right.
All right, let's go to a points league question. How do you rank Bush, Santana, and Rizzo in a points league? I'm assuming this means Carlos Santana?
That was my thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say Bush, Rizzo, Santana.
Yeah. I actually would say Bush, Santana.
Oh, in a points league. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Basebone has it exactly right there. That would be what I would say.
All right. Another question from Dad. Cedric Mullins has been abysmal recently, hitting 3 for 22 the last 2 weeks with an OBP of 121. Are we concerned with the lack of production, or should we foresee him picking it up soon? Of course, Mullins got off to an amazing start, which I did not expect, and now he's gone back the other way. So no, I mean, I don't think Mullins is like droppable. I wouldn't say I'm concerned necessarily, but I think we just need to uncouple that, previous production and the start of the season from what is like the outcome that we expected, going into the preseason. I think he'll be useful, but if you're expecting a bounce back to early April production, probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, it hasn't really been that long. Like, he has been good for this season, arguably for longer than he's been bad for this season. And so I'm not looking at the bad stretches like, oh, it's falling apart, right? I'm looking at like the normal ebbs and flows of a season. And so I'm not bailing on him.
Right. IL stashes, always an interesting topic. Better overall stash in an OPS Roto League: Lane Thomas, Luis Rengifo, Wyatt Langford. I think you've answered the question, at least to me. I think this is the order. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. We've talked about Langford a little bit before. It's like he's going to be out the longest of the three. And then I don't think there's any reason for the Rangers to rush him back. They could give him as long in a rehab stint in the minors as possible, just to really kind of let him, because he wasn't bad, but he also wasn't like really thriving as a major leaguer. And that's a cheap way for him to get like 3 weeks worth of AAA at bats before coming back up. And so I think Lane Thomas has the most upside, even though Rengifo is playing the best of these three right now. If you need somebody immediately, Rengifo will hopefully be off the IL soon, since it was just an illness, but we don't know for
sure. Unless we get a couple more, we'll wrap it up here with Jon Gray. Has a 1.62 ERA in the last month, 2.36 ERA on the year. Pitched brilliantly at Coors Field over the weekend as well, which is nice. Do we feel he continues his strong start, or are we expecting him to get another finger injury soon? Thoughts on Gray long term? I like Gray quite a bit. I don't, naturally 2.36 ERA, it's going to be tough to tough to keep up. I mean, the way that I viewed Gray outside of Coors Field, now in Texas, I looked at him in the preseason as like a third or fourth starter on the mixed league staff. And I think nothing has really changed as far as that's concerned. I'm happy to pocket what we've gotten so far, but my expectations going forward would be something like that.
Yeah, I think Gray, Gray looked really good for part of the season last year too. I think he ebbs and flows because nothing he has is dominant. And so when he has his, when stuff is clicking and it's working, he looks solid. And then there are moments where things, kind of go sideways for him. Sometimes it's injury related. Sometimes, he constantly tweaks that slider, and sometimes it's just not working. And so I think he is probably worth keeping on your roster in most like 12 and 15 team leagues all year long. And there's just going to be some cold stretches mixed in there. And hopefully not a huge one. I did want to
last question.
I was just saying, can we also throw the question from Jetta on there about this minor league starting pitcher stashes?
Oh yeah.
I wanted to just call out two guys who jumped out to me.
There you go.
So the two pitchers that jumped out to me, one is David Festa, who's in the Twins organization. Simeon Woods Richardson took the spot that was originally Louis Varland. Woods Richardson has had some solid starts so far in the major leagues, but nothing stands out. Like I just don't really buy it long term. I don't think he's imminently getting demoted. But Festa is somebody who so far in AAA this year has posted a 36% strikeout rate. It's a 22.6% strikeout minus walk rate. It's a near 17% swinging strike rate. He was interesting to me at the start of the year. I will like hat tip to both Nick Pollock and Eno Saris, who talked him up in the spring and caused me to like look into him. And I think he has he's probably the next guy up. He has a shot. And then also Cade Povich of the Orioles. The Orioles have these veteran guys in there right now that are doing well. And, John Means and Cole Irvin, and Means has questionable health, and Cole Irvin is, Cole Irvin. We don't know what we're going to get. We assume Grayson Rodriguez is coming back at some point. Kyle Bradish's situation is interesting because that elbow, you don't want to say it, but that elbow could go at any minute. Povich is their top pitching prospect. He has a 37% strikeout rate in AAA, 13.6% swinging strike rate, over a 25% strikeout minus walk rate. He is another lefty that could fill in the John Means, Cole Irvin left-handed pitcher spot in the starting rotation. So I don't know that any of these guys are worth stashing. I really don't think there is a starting pitching prospect worth stashing, because to me, the next two big ones are like Jackson Jobe and Cade Horton. And I don't think either one is up before like July or August. But those are two guys who I think would be impact arms if they got the call. And then I'm always looking at AJ Smith-Shawver too, because I don't think Bryce Elder is particularly good, and Smith-Shawver hasn't been particularly good to start this year at AAA, so they're in no rush. But he would be another one that I think could be an impact arm if he starts getting ready.
Last question. We'll wrap it up here and give some props to the A's offense, which over the past 2 weeks has been the best offense in the American League, if not all Major League Baseball. Pretty interesting. Zach Geloff is on his way back. Worth a roster spot? I mean, absolutely. If he was out there on waivers, I would use my number one waiver priority to try to pick him up. Where do you stand on him?
Yeah, I for sure. The over what he was gonna do, but the power and the speed are real, and the lineup context is not as bad as we thought it was. I don't think they're gonna run this hot, obviously, but he's certainly worth a roster spot. I mean, I think there are a few guys, especially at the second base position, that give you that kind of power and speed. And we're seeing a lot of guys at second that we thought like, oh, maybe this will be a solid year for them. Like Jorge Polanco has been bad. Like Gleyber Torres. I'm not dropping Gleyber Torres for Zach Geloff, but I mean, you're not getting production there. Jonathan India has been fairly average. Like there is a need for people who can produce in 5 categories at the second base spot. And so I'd be scooping up Geloff if I have the opportunity to.
All right. Good stuff. Thanks for the questions, everyone. If we didn't get to yours, come find us on Twitter or X, and we can help you guys out. I'm at DJ Short. Eric is at Samsky NYC. Stay tuned to the Rotoworld Baseball Show, another episode tomorrow. And we're going to have some more articles on NBCSports.com and the fantasy baseball section about these new Statcast tools and how to use them to your advantage in fantasy leagues, and just how to better understand them in general. So stay tuned for all of that. Take care, everyone. We will see you next week.